Welcome back to the conclusion of When the Billionaire Came Home Early. Her secret was exposed. If you're just joining us, let me catch you up on everything that's happened so far. Daniel Harrington, billionaire CEO and one of the most powerful men in the country, came home early from a business trip and discovered a secret that shattered his entire world. His fiancée, Naomi Carter, had been hiding his 5-year-old son from him, a child he never knew existed. The betrayal was devastating. Daniel disappeared for days, refusing to speak to Naomi, drowning in rage and grief over the 5 years of his son's life that had been stolen from him. He filed for custody, ready to go to war. But then everything changed. Daniel's assistant, Claire, showed him security footage from 6 years ago, the night his father, Richard Harrington, had paid Naomi off and threatened her into disappearing from Daniel's life. The night Richard had lied to both of them, manipulating them into believing the other had abandoned their relationship willingly. Daniel realized that Naomi hadn't been trying to trap him or manipulate him. She'd been surviving. She'd been a terrified young woman, pregnant and alone, convinced that the man she loved had chosen his father's money over her. And now, as part 1 ended, Daniel was standing outside Naomi's apartment, ready to have the conversation that would determine everything. Ready to decide if love could survive this level of betrayal. Ready to figure out if two broken people could rebuild something real. Before we dive back in, if you haven't watched part 1, the link is in the description. You need to see how we got here because what happens next is going to test everything you think you know about forgiveness, trust, and second chances. And if you're here from part 1, welcome back. Type ready in the comments so I know you're here for the conclusion of this emotional journey. Now let's find out what happens when Daniel and Naomi finally face each other, and the truth. Naomi was drowning in legal documents when someone knocked on her apartment door. She ignored it at first, probably another reporter, another photographer trying to get a shot of the woman who deceived Daniel Harrington. But the knocking persisted. Polite but insistent. "Naomi, it's me. Please open the door." Daniel's voice. Naomi's heart stopped. She looked down at herself, sweatpants, one of Elijah's cartoon character shirts, hair that hadn't been washed in 2 days. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman falling apart. She opened the door anyway. Daniel stood in her hallway, looking almost as wrecked as she felt. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them could speak. "We need to talk," Daniel said finally. Naomi nodded and stepped aside to let him in. He entered her modest 2-bedroom apartment, so different from his estate, from his penthouse, from every space he usually inhabited. This was real life. This was where his son had grown up. They sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, the same table where she'd fed Elijah breakfast that morning, where they'd done puzzles and homework and lived an entire life Daniel had known nothing about. "I saw the footage," Daniel began. "From 5 years ago. My father lied to both of us." Naomi's breath caught. "Daniel, let me finish." His voice was strained, raw with emotion he'd been holding back for days. "I spent the last week hating you. Thinking you were just like everyone else who wanted something from me. Thinking you'd played me for a fool. But I was wrong." Tears started streaming down Naomi's face before she could stop them. "My father destroyed us once," Daniel continued. "He manipulated both of us, lied to both of us, and we believed him because we were young and scared and didn't know how to fight back. That's on him. But Naomi..." He met her eyes, and she could see the pain there, the betrayal that couldn't be erased by understanding. "You had a year to tell me about Elijah. A year since we reconnected. I told you I searched for you, that I never stopped caring. And you looked me in the eyes and kept lying." "I know," Naomi whispered. "I know I should have told you. I was scared, Daniel. Scared you'd think I was trying to trap you like your father said I was. Scared you'd take Elijah away from me. Scared I'd lose you both. But that doesn't make it right. Nothing makes it right." "You stole 5 years from me," Daniel said, and his voice broke. 5 years of my son's life. I can never get those back, Naomi. No matter how much I understand why you did it, I can never get those years back. I know, Naomi sobbed. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They sat in painful silence, years of love and lies and loss hanging between them like smoke. Finally, Daniel spoke again. I want to meet him. Properly this time. Not in the middle of a crisis. I want to meet my son and start. I don't know. Start building something. Hope flickered in Naomi's chest for the first time in over a week. He's at a friend's house right now. I've been trying to keep him away from all this chaos. But Daniel, I need you to understand. He doesn't know who you are. He doesn't understand any of this. We have to be careful. We have to put him first. I know, Daniel said. And I will. I promise you, Naomi, whatever happens between us, I will put Elijah first. It was the first promise he'd made her in 8 days, and Naomi clung to it like a lifeline. Just as something fragile and hopeful began to build between them, Naomi's phone rang. She almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed her lawyer's name. Jennifer wouldn't call this late unless it was urgent. I have to take this, Naomi said apologetically. Daniel nodded. Naomi answered the phone. Jennifer. Naomi, we have a problem. Her lawyer's voice was tight with anger. Victoria Steele just filed a motion with the court. She's claiming she has evidence that Elijah might not be Daniel's biological son. The world tilted. What? She's demanding a court-ordered DNA test and suggesting that you had multiple relationships during the time of conception. She's trying to paint you as someone who doesn't even know who the father is. Naomi's face went white. Her hands started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. That's a lie. That's a complete lie. I know it is, Jennifer said. But the judge granted the motion. You have 48 hours to submit to DNA testing for both you and Elijah, with Daniel as the father. If you refuse, the court will assume you have something to hide. Naomi looked up at Daniel, who was watching her with growing concern. Jennifer, Daniel is sitting right here with me. We were starting to figure things out. Then you need to figure it out fast, Jennifer said. Because Victoria Steele just threw a grenade into your custody case. This isn't about truth anymore, Naomi. This is about destroying you completely. Naomi ended the call and met Daniel's eyes. She watched understanding dawn on his face as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. What happened? He asked. Victoria filed a motion claiming Elijah might not be yours, Naomi said, her voice hollow. She's demanding court-ordered DNA testing. She's trying to make it look like I don't even know who the father is. Daniel's expression hardened into something Naomi had never seen before, cold, calculated fury. That's not about proving paternity. We both know Elijah is mine. This is about humiliation. About dragging you through the mud publicly. The judge granted it, Naomi whispered. We have 48 hours. Daniel stood up, his jaw set. Then we'll do the test. We'll prove Victoria is lying. And then... His eyes glittered dangerously. Then I'm going to destroy her the same way she's trying to destroy you. Naomi should have felt relief. But all she felt was exhaustion. Because even after the DNA test proved what they both knew, even after Victoria's lies were exposed, the damage would be done. Their private pain would be public entertainment. Elijah would eventually hear the rumors, would grow up knowing his existence had been questioned, doubted, used as a weapon. And somewhere in the wreckage of what they'd once had, Naomi wondered if love could survive this many betrayals, both the ones she'd committed and the ones being committed against them. Victoria Steele wasn't done destroying them. Not by a long shot. And as Daniel left Naomi's apartment that night with a promise to face whatever came next together, neither of them realized just how deep Victoria's vengeance ran, or how much more they stood to lose before this war was over. So let me ask you something. Should Daniel forgive Naomi completely, or is the trust too broken to ever fully rebuild? And what would you do to Victoria Steele if you were in their position? Would you fight back with everything you had, or would you take the high road and let karma handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're still here, if you've been riding this emotional roller coaster with me, type the word exposed in the comments so I know you're invested in seeing how this all plays out. Because what comes next is going to test everything you think you know about love, forgiveness, and whether two people can rebuild from ashes. The morning of the DNA test arrived with all the subtlety of a media circus descending on a small-town scandal. The New York County Courthouse, a building that had witnessed countless human dramas play out within its marble walls, had never seen anything quite like this. Satellite trucks lined the street. Reporters jostled for position on the courthouse steps. Cameras with telephoto lenses pointed at every entrance like weapons waiting for their target. The headlines had already been written, printed, and plastered across every news outlet in the country. Billionaire's fiancé in paternity scandal. Secret baby drama. Who is Elijah's real father? Naomi Carter's web of lies unravels in court. Victoria Steele had made sure every major outlet received an anonymous tip about the court-ordered DNA test. She'd leaked just enough information to make it sound scandalous, just enough innuendo to make people question everything. The reporters didn't know the full story, they never did, but they knew enough to smell blood in the water. Naomi Carter arrived at the courthouse in a car with tinted windows, her hand gripping Elijah's so tightly the 5-year-old winced. She dressed him in his nicest clothes, a button-down shirt and khaki pants that made him look painfully young and innocent. She braided her natural hair into elegant cornrows, applied minimal makeup to hide the sleepless nights, and worn a simple navy dress that screamed respectability. But none of it mattered when she stepped out of the car and the cameras descended like vultures. Miss Carter. Is it true you don't know who Elijah's father is? Naomi. Are you using this child to extort money from Daniel Harrington? How many men were you involved with during the time of conception? Each question was a blade. Naomi pulled Elijah close, shielding his face from the cameras, trying to block his ears from words no child should ever hear. Her lawyer, Jennifer Rodriguez, flanked her other side, shouting at reporters to back off, threatening legal action for harassment. But the damage was already being done. This moment, Naomi being publicly humiliated on courthouse steps while clutching her terrified son, would be replayed on news channels for days. The image would define her in the public consciousness, the woman who maybe, possibly, couldn't even identify her own child's father. Then Daniel appeared. His security team, 6 men built like linebackers in expensive suits, formed a protective corridor up the courthouse steps. Daniel himself looked like he hadn't slept, but he was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His jaw was set, his eyes hard, and when he saw Naomi struggling through the crowd of reporters, something shifted in his expression. He moved down the steps toward her, his security team adjusting their formation to accommodate him. When he reached Naomi and Elijah, he didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy up into his arms, shielding him with his body the way a father protects his child. "We're going to get through this," Daniel said to Naomi, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the chaos. "I promise you, we're going to get through this." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not where every camera would capture her breaking down and use it as evidence of guilt. Together, with Elijah safe in Daniel's arms, they climbed the courthouse steps. The security team kept the reporters at bay, but the questions kept coming, relentless and cruel. Inside the courthouse, the chaos faded to an eerie quiet. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as they were led to a private room where the DNA test would be administered. The process itself was absurdly simple. A nurse with kind eyes swabbed the inside of Elijah's cheek, then Daniel's, then Naomi's for baseline comparison. "That's it?" Elijah asked, confused by all the fuss over something so quick and painless. "That's it, buddy," Daniel said, ruffling his son's hair with a tenderness that made Naomi's heart ache. But the implications of that simple cheek swab were monumental. In 24 hours, a laboratory would confirm what everyone in that room already knew, that Daniel Harrington was Elijah's biological father. But until those results came back, Naomi would exist in a limbo of public suspicion, her character assassinated by innuendo and Victoria Steele's carefully planted lies. They had to appear briefly in the courtroom afterward, a formality to confirm the test had been administered. Victoria sat in the back row, dressed in cream-colored designer everything, looking like she'd already won. Her lawyer sat beside her, a shark in a $1,000 suit who specialized in making innocent people look guilty. Victoria's eyes met Naomi's across the courtroom, and she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small satisfied curve of her lips that said everything. This wasn't about truth. It was about destruction. It was about making Naomi Carter suffer in the most public, humiliating way possible. After the hearing, Victoria held an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps. She stood in front of the cameras with practiced poise, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her expression one of concerned innocence. "I want to be clear," Victoria said, her voice carrying just the right note of reluctance. "This isn't about me. This is about protecting the truth and ensuring that a child's parentage is established beyond doubt. If Elijah is Daniel's son, that's wonderful. He deserves to know his father. But if he's not..." Victoria paused meaningfully. "Then the public deserves to know what kind of woman Naomi Carter really is. A woman who would lie about something this fundamental raises serious questions about character, about honesty, about fitness to parent." The reporters ate it up, scribbling notes, recording every word for the evening news cycle. Inside a car with tinted windows parked a block away, Naomi watched Victoria's performance on Jennifer's phone and felt something inside her crack. "She's destroying me," Naomi whispered. "Even when the test proves she's lying, the damage is already done. People will always wonder. They'll always think maybe there was some truth to it." Daniel, sitting beside her with Elijah asleep against his shoulder, reached over and took her hand. "Let her have her moment. Because in 24 hours, everyone will know she lied. And then it's our turn." But Naomi knew it wasn't that simple. Lies spread faster than truth. Suspicion lingered longer than exoneration. Even after the DNA results came back, there would be people who believed Victoria's version of events, who thought Naomi had somehow manipulated the tests or gotten lucky. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict, and Naomi Carter had been found guilty. While they waited for the DNA results that would confirm what everyone already knew, Daniel Harrington made a decision. He was done playing defense. Done letting Victoria Steele dictate the terms of this war. Done being reactive instead of proactive. It was time to go on the offense. Daniel hired the best investigative team money could buy, not the kind of investigators who worked for law firms and played by the rules, but the kind who knew how to dig up truths that people desperately wanted buried. Former FBI agents. Forensic accountants who'd made careers out of finding money hidden in offshore accounts. Digital security experts who could track electronic footprints through layers of encryption. "I want to know everything about Victoria Steele," Daniel told the team leader, a woman named Sarah Chun who had a reputation for being absolutely merciless when she caught the scent of corruption. Where her money really comes from. Who she's connected to. What she's hiding. Everything. "How far are we authorized to go?" Sarah asked. "As far as you need to," Daniel said. "But everything you find needs to be admissible in court. I want her destroyed, but I want it done legally." Sarah smiled. "The best takedowns always are." The investigative team worked with the efficiency of surgeons performing a complicated operation. They started with Victoria's public persona, the socialite descended from old money, the woman who chaired charity boards and attended galas, whose family name appeared on museum wings and hospital foundations. But when they looked closer, the facade started to crack. Victoria's family fortune was largely fictional. Her grandfather had indeed been wealthy, But that money had been squandered 2 generations ago through bad investments and lavish lifestyles. By the time Victoria came of age, there was almost nothing left except the name and the reputation. So Victoria had built her own empire. And she'd built it on fraud. The investigators discovered a complex web of shell companies, fake investment opportunities, and embezzled funds. Victoria had been running what amounted to a sophisticated Ponzi scheme for years, using her socialite status and family name as cover. She'd convince wealthy acquaintances to invest in exclusive opportunities, pay early investors with money from new investors, and skim millions off the top for herself. She's been stealing from her own social circle for at least 5 years, Sarah told Daniel, laying out spreadsheets and bank records. Maybe longer. She's good, I'll give her that. But she got sloppy about 6 months ago, right around the time you proposed to Naomi Carter. Why 6 months ago? Daniel asked. Because that's when she started spending money on something else, Sarah said, pulling up another file. She hired a private investigation firm, the kind that doesn't ask questions about legality. Paid them over $200,000 to dig up dirt on Naomi Carter. When they found out about Elijah, she paid another $150,000 to have surveillance equipment installed in Naomi's apartment. Daniel's blood went cold. She bugged Naomi's home? Illegally, Sarah confirmed. We've got the receipts. She's been listening to Naomi's private conversations for months, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate this information. It's illegal surveillance, Daniel. Federal crime. And we can prove it. But there was more. The investigation revealed that Victoria had orchestrated the emergency board meeting at Harrington Global, had fed information to certain board members to turn them against Daniel, had even hired people to leak false stories to the press about Daniel's instability and poor judgment. She's been planning your downfall for over a year, Sarah said. Ever since you broke up with her and got back together with Naomi. This isn't jealousy, Daniel. This is obsession. Daniel stared at the evidence spread across his desk. Bank records, surveillance receipts, witness statements from people Victoria had hired and subsequently betrayed. It was enough to bury her. Enough to send her to federal prison for years. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. Marcus, I need you to contact the FBI. I have evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and illegal surveillance. Tell them I want to cooperate fully with any investigation into Victoria Steele. Then he called a press contact he'd known for years. I have a story for you. But you have to sit on it for 48 hours until the FBI makes their move. Do we have a deal? Daniel Harrington had built an empire by knowing when to negotiate and when to annihilate. Victoria Steele had declared war on his family. Now she was about to learn what happened when you went after someone who had more resources, more connections, and absolutely nothing left to lose. 48 hours after the DNA test, 2 things happened simultaneously. The first was the DNA results. The courtroom was packed, reporters in the gallery, spectators who'd lined up at dawn for seats, court officers maintaining order in a room that buzzed with tension. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table with Jennifer beside her, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Daniel sat on her other side, Elijah, thank God, safely at home with a nanny, spared from witnessing this particular humiliation. The judge, a woman named Judith Martinez who looked like she'd seen every variation of human drama and was tired of all of them, opened the sealed envelope containing the DNA results. In the matter of paternity testing for the minor child Elijah Carter, Judge Martinez read, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, DNA analysis performed by the state-certified laboratory confirms with 99.9% certainty that Daniel Harrington is the biological father. Naomi closed her eyes as tears streamed down her face. Not tears of relief. She'd never doubted the results. These were tears of grief for what her son would eventually have to know about his birth, about the public spectacle that had questioned his very existence, about having his parentage turned into entertainment for strangers. Daniel exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from his shoulders even though he'd never truly doubted either. His hand found Naomi's under the table and squeezed. Judge Martinez continued, her expression stern. Let me be clear that Ms. Steele's motion was not only without merit, but bordered on malicious prosecution. Filing false claims about paternity to harass a litigant is grounds for sanctions. Ms. Steele's lawyer, she looked around. Where is Ms. Steele's counsel? The defense table was empty. Victoria's lawyer had fled the courthouse that morning, probably sensing which way the wind was blowing. Well, Judge Martinez said dryly, I suppose that answers that question. All of Ms. Steele's claims are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Harrington, Ms. Carter, you're free to go. But before they could stand, the judge added one more thing. And for what it's worth, I hope you're able to give that little boy a stable home away from this circus. He deserves better than what you've all put him through. The words stung because they were true, but they also carried a note of compassion that made Naomi's throat tighten. Outside the courthouse, Daniel addressed the press for the first time since this nightmare began. He stood at the top of the steps with Naomi beside him, his security team forming a barrier against the surging crowd of reporters. Elijah Carter is my son, Daniel said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people stop and listen. The DNA test confirms what Naomi and I have always known. Victoria Steele lied to this court, lied to the public, and attempted to destroy my family for her own vindictive purposes. A reporter shouted, What about the allegations that Naomi hid your son from you? Daniel's jaw tightened. That's between me and Naomi, and it's nobody else's business. What I will say is this, Naomi is the woman I love. Elijah is the son I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up lost time with. And anyone who tries to interfere with my family again will face every legal resource I have at my disposal. He took Naomi's hand, and together they walked down the courthouse steps. No more questions. No more explanations. Just two people who'd been through hell and were finally starting to find their way back to each other. The second thing that happened that day was Victoria's arrest. It happened at her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, in front of neighbors who'd always envied her lifestyle and never suspected where the money really came from. Federal agents arrived at dawn with a warrant, and by 7 a.m., Victoria Steele was being led out of her building in handcuffs. The charges read like something from a crime thriller: wire fraud, embezzlement of investor funds, money laundering, illegal electronic surveillance, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each count carried years of federal prison time. The media that had spent days tearing apart Naomi Carter turned their attention to Victoria with the fickle cruelty of a mob sensing new blood. Within hours, every news outlet in the country was running stories about Victoria's Ponzi scheme, her fake fortune, her illegal surveillance of Naomi's home. Investors who trusted Victoria with their money came forward with stories of promises made and funds that disappeared. Business partners revealed deals that had been too good to be true. Former friends spoke about Victoria's jealousy, her vindictiveness, her obsession with maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. Victoria's empire, built on lies and propped up by a stolen fortune, collapsed in a matter of hours. She made bail, but her passport was confiscated. House arrest while awaiting trial. Her assets frozen pending restitution to the people she'd defrauded. Her social standing, the only currency she'd ever truly valued, destroyed completely. In the space of 48 hours, Victoria Steele went from society darling to federal defendant, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'd tried to destroy Naomi by questioning her character, her honesty, her fitness as a mother. Instead, she'd exposed herself as a criminal whose entire life had been a carefully constructed fraud. Karma, as it turned out, had exquisite timing. But even with Victoria facing justice, even with the DNA results public and irrefutable, Daniel and Naomi knew their battle wasn't over. Because the legal war was finished, but the emotional one had barely begun. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild itself just because circumstances change. Love, once betrayed, doesn't automatically heal because the external threats are neutralized. And a family fractured by years of lies and secrets doesn't become whole again just because everyone wants it to. The real work was just beginning. Daniel and Naomi started attending family therapy together 3 times a week. Not couples therapy. Their therapist, Dr. Sharon Williams, was careful to distinguish the difference. This was family therapy because the goal wasn't just to repair their romantic relationship. It was to build something they'd never actually had, a functional family unit. The sessions were brutal. There were days when Naomi sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe, the weight of her choices crushing down on her as she finally allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of what she'd done. There were sessions where Daniel's anger erupted in ways that shocked both of them, years of controlled rage finally finding release in that safe space. "I missed everything," Daniel said during one particularly difficult session, his voice raw. First words. First steps. First day of school. Birthdays. Christmases. "I missed 5 years of my son's life, and I can never get those back. No amount of understanding why you did it changes that, Naomi. Those years are gone." Naomi couldn't defend herself because he was right. "I know," she whispered, "and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But Daniel, I need you to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to survive. Your father paid me to disappear and threatened to destroy my mother's life if I didn't. When you came back years later, I was terrified that telling you about Elijah would make you think I'd been waiting all along to trap you, just like your father said I would. But you had a year," Daniel said. "A full year after we reconnected. A year where I proved I loved you, where I showed you I wasn't my father. And you still didn't tell me." "I know," Naomi said again, tears streaming down her face. "And that was wrong. I was a coward, Daniel. I let fear dictate my choices, and our son paid the price. We all paid the price." Dr. Williams let the silence hang between them before speaking. "The question now isn't whether Naomi's choices were right or wrong. We've established they caused harm. The question is whether you two can move forward from this. Daniel, can you eventually forgive Naomi for keeping Elijah from you? And Naomi, can you forgive yourself?" That second question hit harder than the first. Because Naomi realized she'd been so focused on earning Daniel's forgiveness that she hadn't even considered whether she deserved her own. The therapy sessions continued, painful and necessary. They worked through trust issues, through communication breakdowns, through the fear that even if they rebuilt their relationship, it would never be what it could have been if they'd had those 5 years together as a family. But slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, healing began. While the adults worked through their trauma, Daniel began the even more important work of building a relationship with his son. He started slowly, carefully, always mindful of Elijah's comfort and Naomi's boundaries. Saturday mornings at the park where they'd throw a football and Daniel would help Elijah climb the jungle gym. Weekday dinners at Naomi's apartment where Daniel would arrive with takeout and they'd eat together like a normal family. Elijah was cautious at first. This man, this stranger who looked like him, had appeared suddenly in his life, and even at 5 years old, Elijah could sense the complicated emotions swirling around the adults. But kids are remarkably resilient, and Daniel was patient. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Daniel asked one afternoon, noticing the toy stegosaurus clutched in Elijah's hand. Elijah's eyes lit up. "I love dinosaurs. My favorite is the velociraptor because they're smart and fast and they hunt in packs." "Mine too," Daniel said, and he wasn't lying. He'd been obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, had an entire collection of books he'd saved from his childhood. "Would you want to go to the Natural History Museum sometime? They have a huge dinosaur exhibit." "Really?" Elijah looked at Naomi for permission, and when she nodded, his whole face transformed with excitement. "Can we go soon?" "This weekend, if your mom says it's okay." That weekend trip to the museum became the first of many. Daniel discovered his son was brilliant, curious about everything, asking questions that demonstrated a sharp mind and an imagination that refused to be contained. Elijah loved dinosaurs and space and building elaborate structures with blocks that always collapsed but never discouraged him from trying again. And slowly, tentatively, Elijah began to trust this man who kept showing up, who listened when he talked, who made his mother smile in ways she hadn't before. One evening, about 3 months into their carefully constructed relationship, Daniel was helping Elijah build a fort in Naomi's living room. They draped blankets over chairs and created a cave-like space lit by flashlights. "Daniel," Elijah asked, his voice small in the dim light. "Yeah, buddy." "Are you my dad?" Daniel's breath caught. Naomi had been in the kitchen, but he could hear her movement stop, could sense her listening from the other room. "Yeah," Daniel said carefully. "I am." Elijah processed this for a moment. "Where were you before?" It was the question Daniel had been dreading. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that you didn't know he existed? That his mother had kept him a secret, but for reasons that came from fear rather than malice? How do you answer that without making the child feel unwanted or making his mother the villain? "I was far away," Daniel said finally. "And I didn't know about you, which was the biggest mistake of my life. Because if I had known, Elijah, I would have been there from the very beginning. I would have been there when you were born, and for every birthday, and for every moment. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere ever again." "Okay." Elijah thought about this, his blue eyes, Daniel's eyes, serious and assessing. "What do I call you?" Daniel's throat tightened. "What do you want to call me?" "My friend Tyler calls his dad Daddy." "But you're more grown up than a daddy." Elijah paused, thinking. "Can I call you Dad?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "I would be honored if you called me Dad." "Okay, Dad," Elijah said, testing out the word. Then he smiled, that unself-conscious, pure smile of a child who's decided to trust, and threw his arms around Daniel's neck. From the kitchen, Naomi covered her mouth to muffle her sobs. This was what she'd been terrified of losing. This moment. This connection. But watching Daniel hold their son, watching her boy finally have the father he'd always deserved, Naomi realized something profound. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. Elijah gaining a father didn't mean she'd lose her son. It meant they could finally become the family they were always meant to be. But there was one more ghost from the past that needed to be confronted before they could truly move forward. One more man whose actions had set this entire tragedy in motion. One more reckoning that Daniel had been avoiding because facing it meant acknowledging just how deeply the betrayal ran. Richard Harrington needed to answer for what he'd done. Daniel showed up at his father's estate unannounced on a Saturday morning. The property was even more massive than Daniel's own, a sprawling compound that screamed old money and older secrets. Daniel had grown up here, in these perfectly manicured gardens and cold marble hallways, raised by nannies and boarding schools while his father built an empire. He found Richard in his private study, a room that smelled of leather and cigar smoke and the particular scent of power that comes from never being told no. "Daniel," Richard said, barely looking up from the documents he was reviewing. "I heard about the Victoria Steel situation. Unfortunate business." "Unfortunate." Daniel's voice was dangerously calm. "That's what you call it?" Richard finally looked up, reading his son's expression. "If you're here to discuss your personal drama, I don't have time." "You destroyed my relationship with Naomi," Daniel interrupted. 6 years ago, you paid her off and lied to both of us. You told me she was a gold digger who took the money gladly. You told her I'd abandoned her. You orchestrated our separation because you decided she wasn't good enough for your son." Richard's expression didn't change. "I did what was necessary to protect you." "Protect me?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "From what? From a woman who actually loved me? From a relationship that might have made me happy? From a girl with no connections, no family, no value beyond her appearance," Richard said coldly. "You are the heir to an empire. You can't afford to marry someone just because you find them attractive. Marriage is a business merger, Daniel. I thought I'd taught you that." "You taught me a lot of things," Daniel said. "You taught me that money matters more than people. That power is more important than love. That maintaining the Harrington legacy justifies any betrayal, any lie, any cruelty. And those lessons have made you very successful," Richard pointed out. "They've made me miserable," Daniel countered. "I have a son I didn't know existed for 5 years because of your manipulation. I lost years with the woman I love because you decided she wasn't worthy of me. You didn't protect me, Dad. You controlled me. And the worst part is, you don't even feel guilty about it." Richard stood, moving to pour himself a whiskey even though it wasn't even noon. "Guilt is a useless emotion. I made the decision I thought was best for our family legacy. If I had to do it again, I would make the same choice." And that, Daniel realized, was the truth. His father wasn't sorry. Wouldn't ever be sorry. Richard Harrington valued legacy over love, control over connection, empire over empathy. He was incapable of understanding that his actions had caused real harm because, in his worldview, harm to individuals was acceptable if it served the greater goal of maintaining power. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder of documents. He placed them on his father's desk. "What's this?" Richard asked. "Your removal from the Harrington Global Board of Directors," Daniel said. "Effective immediately. You'll keep your shares. I can't take those from you, but you'll have no voting power, no say in company decisions, no influence over how the business is run." Richard's face flushed. "You can't do that." "I can and I have," Daniel said. "I control 51% of the voting shares. The board already approved the motion. You're done." "You're making a mistake," Richard said, his voice rising. "Everything I did was to prepare you for this role, to make you strong enough to lead." "No," Daniel interrupted. "Everything you did was to make me into a copy of you. But I'm not you, Dad. And I never will be." Daniel turned toward the door, then paused. "You'll keep your wealth and your estate. You'll live comfortably for the rest of your life. But you will have no say in my company, my life, or my family. If you ever try to interfere with Naomi or Elijah again, if you ever try to manipulate any of us the way you did 6 years ago, I will make sure everyone in our social circle knows exactly what you did. I'll expose every lie, every manipulation, every time you put legacy ahead of your own son's happiness. And your precious reputation will be the one thing you lose that you can actually care about." Richard stared at his son, and for the first time in Daniel's life, he saw something like respect in his father's eyes. Or maybe it was just recognition that Daniel had finally learned to wield power the way Richard always had, without mercy. "Get out of my house," Richard said quietly. "Gladly," Daniel replied. He walked out of his father's estate and didn't look back. Some relationships can't be salvaged. Some betrayals run too deep. And some people will never change, no matter how much you want them to. But at least now, the past was finally put to rest. Richard Harrington would live out his days in comfortable exile from his son's life, and Daniel could focus on building a future that wasn't haunted by the ghosts of old manipulations. 6 months after the DNA test that had almost destroyed them, Naomi Carter and Daniel Harrington stood on a private beach in the Caribbean, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. The wedding was everything their relationship had never been: open, honest, witnessed by friends and family instead of hidden in shadows. Naomi wore a simple white gown that hugged her curves and flowed into a train that caught the ocean breeze. Her natural curls were adorned with small white flowers, her makeup minimal, her smile genuine. Daniel stood at an altar made of driftwood and white roses, wearing a crisp linen suit the color of sand, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. This woman who'd made terrible choices, but for understandable reasons. This woman who'd broken his heart, but also given him a son. This woman who he loved despite everything, because of everything, with an intensity that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Between them, holding a small silk pillow with their wedding rings, stood Elijah. He was grinning from ear to ear, dressed in a miniature version of Daniel's suit, thrilled to be such an important part of his parents' wedding. The officiant, a woman who'd worked with them during family therapy and understood the weight of what this ceremony represented, began to speak. "Love," she said, "is not the absence of betrayal or pain or difficulty. Love is the choice to stay, to rebuild, to forgive, not because the harm wasn't real, but because the connection is worth fighting for." Naomi and Daniel have been through more than most couples face in a lifetime. They've hurt each other, lost years they can never reclaim, and faced public scrutiny that would have destroyed a weaker bond. She looked at both of them. But they're here. They chose to do the hard work of healing. They chose their son's well-being over their own pride. They chose love over resentment. And that's what we're celebrating today, not perfection, but perseverance. When it came time for vows, Daniel spoke first. His voice was steady, but emotion glittered in his eyes. "Naomi, I can't pretend the last few years haven't been painful. I can't pretend your choices didn't hurt me. But I also can't pretend I don't understand why you made them. Fear is a powerful thing, and you were afraid of losing everything, afraid of not being enough, afraid that the world would reject you and our son." He took her hands. "I promise you from this day forward, you never have to be afraid with me again. I promise to be the partner you can trust, the father Elijah deserves, and the man who chooses you every single day. No more secrets. No more lies. Just us, building something real." Naomi's voice shook when she spoke, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, I stole time from you. Time with our son, time we could have been a family. And I'm sorry, sorrier than words can ever express. But I promise you, I will spend the rest of our lives making up for those lost years. I promise to be honest even when it's hard, to trust you even when I'm scared, to choose courage over fear." She looked down at Elijah, then back at Daniel. "I promise to love our family, this beautiful, complicated, hard-won family, with everything I have." When Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, he whispered, "No more secrets." "No more secrets," Naomi promised. They kissed as the ocean waves crashed behind them, and Elijah jumped up and down shouting, "Mommy and Daddy are married. Mommy and Daddy are married." The reception was intimate, maybe 40 people, all of them real friends rather than business connections or society obligations. No reporters. No press. Just people who genuinely cared about this family and wanted to celebrate their unlikely reunion. Daniel gave a toast that made half the guests cry. He stood with a glass of champagne in hand, looking at Naomi with an expression of such complete devotion that no one doubted the authenticity of his feelings. "I thought I knew what power was," Daniel said. "I built an empire. I commanded boardrooms. I had every material thing money could buy. But it wasn't until I almost lost this woman, until I discovered I had a son I'd never known, that I understood what real wealth is." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "Real wealth is standing in your living room helping your kid build a fort and having him call you dad for the first time. Real wealth is watching the woman you love trust you enough to be vulnerable. Real wealth is second chances that you don't deserve but fight like hell to be worthy of." He raised his glass. "To Naomi, who taught me that love is brave. To Elijah, who gave me a reason to be better than I was. And to all of you for standing by us when our story was anything but pretty. Thank you." Naomi stood to give her own toast, her hands shaking slightly. "I spent 5 years hiding," she said. "Hiding my son, hiding my truth, hiding my fear. I convinced myself I was protecting us, but really, I was just too scared to be vulnerable. Too scared to trust that love could survive honesty." She looked at Daniel. This man had every reason to walk away. "I lied to him for years. I kept his child from him. I almost destroyed any chance we had at a future. But instead of walking away, he did the hardest thing, he stayed. He did the work. He chose us even when we didn't make it easy." She wiped tears from her eyes. "But love doesn't live in hiding. It lives in courage. It lives in honesty. It lives in choosing to be vulnerable even when it's terrifying. Daniel gave me the courage to stop running and start building something real. And I promise, for the rest of our lives, I will never take that gift for granted. They danced under string lights as the sun set over the ocean, casting everything in shades of gold and pink. Elijah ran around with the other children at the reception, finally free from the weight of secrets, finally just a kid at his parents' wedding having the time of his life. Later that night, after most of the guests had left and Elijah had fallen asleep on a beach blanket, Daniel and Naomi walked along the shoreline hand in hand. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked. Naomi thought about it. Happy felt too simple a word for what she was feeling. Relief, yes. Gratitude, absolutely. But also something deeper, a sense of peace that came from finally being able to stop hiding. "I'm home," she said. "For the first time in 6 years, I feel like I'm home." Daniel pulled her close. "Then let's never leave." 1 year after the wedding, the Harrington estate had been transformed into something unrecognizable from the cold fortress of glass and steel it had once been. Toys littered the marble floors. Children's artwork hung on walls that had previously displayed abstract paintings worth millions. The sound of laughter echoed through hallways that had been silent for too long. Family photos covered every surface: Elijah's first day of kindergarten, beach vacations, birthday parties, Daniel teaching his son to ride a bike. This wasn't a museum anymore. It was a home. Daniel sat on the living room floor on a Sunday afternoon, helping Elijah build an elaborate tower out of wooden blocks. The structure was already taller than Elijah himself, swaying precariously but holding together through sheer determination. "Okay, buddy, this next one's the important one," Daniel said, handing his son a triangular block for the top. "Steady hands." Elijah bit his lip in concentration, carefully placing the block on top. The tower held for 3 glorious seconds before the whole thing came crashing down, blocks scattering across the expensive hardwood floors. Elijah dissolved into giggles. "Daddy, your towers always fall." "Hey, I'm better at building empires than block towers," Daniel protested, laughing. "Can't be good at everything." "That's okay," Elijah said generously. "We can try again." Naomi walked into the room, and Daniel's breath caught the way it still did every time he saw her. She was 6 months pregnant, her hand resting on her rounded belly, wearing one of his old college t-shirts and leggings. Her natural hair was pulled up in a messy bun, no makeup, just pure radiance. "How are my boys?" she asked, smiling at the disaster of blocks covering their living room floor. "We're architects," Elijah announced proudly. "But our buildings keep falling down." "Sounds like you're learning about structural engineering the hard way," Naomi said, lowering herself carefully onto the couch. The baby, a girl they decided to name Maya, kicked, and Naomi winced. Daniel was at her side immediately. "You okay?" "She's got your stubbornness," Naomi said, rubbing her belly. "Won't stop kicking my ribs." "She's going to be a soccer player," Elijah said confidently. "I'm gonna teach her everything." Daniel looked at his son, their son, and felt that familiar ache of lost time. But it was gentler now, tempered by the reality of what they'd built. He couldn't change the past, couldn't reclaim those 5 years. But he could be present for every moment moving forward. He sat on the couch next to Naomi, and Elijah immediately climbed up between them, creating a perfect family sandwich. "You know what?" Daniel said softly. "A year ago, I thought my world had ended. I thought everything was broken beyond repair." "And now?" Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. "Now I know it wasn't ending. It was just beginning." He wrapped his arm around both of them, his hand resting on Naomi's belly where his daughter was already making her presence known. "This, right here, right now, this is everything." Elijah looked up at them with those piercing blue eyes. "Are we going to be a family forever?" Daniel and Naomi answered at the same time, "Forever." And for the first time in 6 years, Naomi believed it. Not because the road had been easy, it hadn't been. Not because they'd erased the past, they couldn't. But because they'd chosen each other, chosen their family, chosen to do the hard work of rebuilding from ashes. The camera pulled back slowly, showing the family curled together on the couch, Elijah between his parents, all of them touching in that unconscious way families do when they feel safe. The evening light streamed through the windows, casting everything in gold. Blocks were scattered across the floor, evidence of a tower that had fallen but would be built again. Because that's what families do, they build, and when things fall apart, they build again. Money can buy mansions made of glass and steel, but it can't buy a home filled with laughter and love and sticky fingerprints on expensive furniture. Power can command empires that span continents, but it can't command the trust of a 5-year-old boy calling you dad for the first time. Success can fill bank accounts and trophy cases, but it can't fill the empty spaces in your heart where family belongs. Daniel Harrington learned that the hard way. He built an empire before he understood what real wealth was. He commanded boardrooms before he learned that the only opinion that truly mattered was the one reflected in his son's eyes. He had everything money could buy before he discovered that the only things worth having can't be purchased. They have to be earned through honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to show up even when you failed. Naomi Carter stopped hiding and discovered that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the foundation every real relationship is built on. She learned that protecting people from the truth doesn't actually protect them, it just delays the inevitable reckoning. She found out that love isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest, even when honesty costs you everything. And Elijah? He got the family he always deserved. A mother who loved him fiercely enough to make terrible choices trying to protect him. A father who showed up late but stayed anyway, determined to make up for every missed moment. A little sister on the way who would grow up knowing both her parents, never having to wonder if she was wanted. Some secrets destroy everything they touch, burning through lives like wildfires that leave nothing but ash. But some secrets, when finally brought into the light, when faced with courage instead of shame, become the foundation for something stronger than what came before. The truth that once threatened to tear them apart became the honesty that held them together. Because at the end of the day, love isn't about perfection. It's not about getting everything right the first time or never making mistakes or maintaining some impossible standard of flawlessness. Love is about showing up. It's about choosing each other even when it's hard. It's about doing the work to rebuild trust brick by painful brick. It's about forgiveness that doesn't erase the past but refuses to be imprisoned by it. Daniel and Naomi's story isn't a fairy tale. It's messier than that, more honest than that, more real than that. But it's theirs. And in the end, that's all that matters. So what's the most powerful lesson you took from this story? Was it about the courage to be vulnerable? The importance of honesty even when it costs everything? The power of forgiveness? Or maybe something else entirely? Drop a comment and let me know what resonated with you. And if you made it to the end, if you rode this entire emotional roller coaster with me from that devastating discovery to this moment of hard-won peace, type the word forever in the comments. Show me you were here for the whole journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Harrington's Stories if you haven't already. Every week, we bring you the most dramatic, emotional, and ultimately hopeful stories about love, family, and second chances. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that even when everything falls apart, there's always a chance to rebuild something beautiful. Until next time, remember this: your past doesn't define your future. Your mistakes don't determine your worth. And it's never too late for a second chance, as long as you're brave enough to take it. Keep believing in redemption. Keep believing in love. Keep believing in the power of truth to set you free. This is Mr. Harrington Stories, and I'll see you in the next one.